accused of letting AIDS-tainted blood products run off its assembly line with deadly consequences.
The victims in this case are people with hemophilia in Costa Rica. They are among thousands of HIV-positive hemophiliacs around the world who are now wondering if the safety of the blood medicine they used was compromised by the profit motive. Senior correspondent John Camp reports.
They are forgotten faces of AIDS. People with hemophilia.
No justice, no peace.
Infected with AIDS by tainted blood products they needed as medicine. Pointing the finger of blame at the companies that made their medicine. Watching helplessly as AIDS nearly wipes out an entire generation of hemophiliacs.
Silence no more! Silence no more!
I see a lot of my friends that are dying from it.
They killed our sons!
Thousands already dead in the United States alone.
I know that one day, eventually, I will. It's hard to face up to.
Worldwide, 3 out of 4 hemophiliacs who use the medicine have been infected with HIV. The AIDS epidemic among hemophiliacs is especially cruel in places like the Central American nation of Costa Rica. Here, many with hemophilia were infected with AIDS by blood products that were not properly purified. Blood products made in the United States and shipped to Costa Rica at a time when safer products were already on the market. This has left health officials and investigators wondering, did blood product manufacturers put profits ahead of safety? Costa Rica, like much of the developing world, is a place where old-fashioned views die hard. Where people with AIDS are outcasts.
I never dreamt the disease would have such a devastating impact. The Costa Rican people do not understand, have no idea what it's like.
Like Fernando, 21-year-old Guillermo has told no one outside his family he is HIV positive.
We hemophiliacs are innocent victims, as we have been contaminated by a blood product simply because we needed help.
The blood product that spread AIDS among those with hemophilia in Costa Rica and around the world is called clotting factor. It is injected regularly to stop internal bleeding, which hemophiliacs cannot naturally control. Today, clotting factor is safe from AIDS. But in the early 1980s, before blood donations were screened for HIV, before blood products were purified, clotting factor was a silent killer. Distilled from here, hemophiliacs who are HIV positive ask us not to identify them. From huge pools of human plasma, a single injection of this medicine exposed hemophiliacs to blood viruses from thousands of donors.
You couldn't ask, in an epidemiologic sense, of a better way to spread disease by taking 10,000 plus individuals, pool that plasma together, and then give that to people intravenously around the world.
By 1984, thousands who used factor had contracted the AIDS virus. Then 2 dramatic changes. First, the makers of factor began a heat-treating process to inactivate HIV, in effect, making the virus harmless. And later, in early 1985, a test was developed to detect HIV antibodies in blood, meaning that bad blood could be screened out.
Oh, it was a revolution. That meant the product was now safe from HIV.
By 1985, the AIDS epidemic among hemophiliacs should have been stopped in its tracks. But for some, the AIDS risk remained, because a portion of existing blood products was placed on the market without being heat-treated or screened for HIV. This had deadly consequences in Costa Rica, where contaminated medicine was sold, most of which was made in the United States by Cutter Biological, one of the world's largest makers of clotting factor. In 1987, researchers at Costa Rica's leading blood lab made an alarming discovery. Even though safer clotting factor was available, AIDS was continuing to spread among hemophiliacs.
We found that 18 patients that were not infected at the end of 1985, we found they seropositive. It means they had antibodies for HIV in the middle of 87.
Dr. Mauricio Freiman is Costa Rica's leading AIDS specialist. He says the clotting factor that those patients were using should never have been in circulation after mid-1985. Is there any evidence that contaminated factor got into the country after that particular time?
Yeah, unfortunately, we could find that people received contaminated factors after their time.
Nearly 4 dozen hemophiliacs in Costa Rica are now suing Miles Pharmaceuticals, the parent company of Cutter Biological, which made the clotting factor they used. Company officials were unable to comment due to pending lawsuits. But court papers show the company sent one shipment of factor that was not heat-treated to kill the AIDS virus 5 months after heat-treated material was in use in the United States. And other company documents show that in the middle of 1985, after a test for detecting HIV in blood donations was online, Cutter shipped to Costa Rica 4 batches of factor made from plasma that was not screened for AIDS. Costa Rican medical authorities later determined that samples from 3 of those shipments were tainted with HIV. How do you feel about the manufacture of the blood product?
Tengo cierto odio.
I feel a certain degree of hatred for them. They're a well-known company, yet they weren't careful about the preparation of all those products.
Although Miles Cutter refused to talk about its business in Costa Rica, the company wrote us a letter insisting it took every precaution to ensure its blood products were safe and effective, and that the courts have repeatedly accepted that position. But other company decisions raise questions about its commitment to safety. For example, when a test to screen blood donations for HIV was implemented in March 1985, Miles Cutter had leftover supplies of clotting factor that, although heat-treated, were made from unscreened plasma. Rather than destroy that inventory, company officials issued orders in this memo dated March 1986 to put unscreened material into finished inventory as soon as possible. And in a second memo, a company official writes, "We need the unscreened inventory to meet our 1986 sales requirements."
I think they should have taken all the material back in, but they didn't do it. They shipped some of it.
Dr. Thomas Dries, for 11 years, ran Alpha Therapeutics, one of the leading makers of factor. He says Miles Cutter's decision to sell unscreened inventory is just one example of the bottom-line calculations that were rampant throughout the clotting factor industry during the 1980s.
I think they were always concerned that if it cost them money, they might not recover all the money. In other words, their total bottom line would go down.
Blood product manufacturers dismiss this criticism as 20/20 hindsight, but others close to the industry tell us that in the early 1980s, the profit motive drove makers of clotting factor to resist adopting safety measures. Measures like placing AIDS warnings on product labels and refusing plasma from high-risk donors.
In late 82, early 83, we were pounding on the table and screaming that a high proportion of hemophiliacs are already infected, that something has to be done. This is a dangerous disease and a dangerous virus. Something needs to be done about it. If there was real aggressive action taken even then, that there could have been a dramatic decrease, at least, in risk of infection.
Former CDC scientist Don Francis raised red flags about AIDS and hemophilia early and often.
Testing is the second option that we should discuss.
He is the central character of the movie And the Band Played On, which hammers the blood industry for dragging its feet on introducing safety measures.
How many dead hemophiliacs do you need? How many people have to die to make it cost efficient for you people to do something about it? Give us a number so we won't annoy you.
Hemophiliacs watching the film see the real-life Dr. Francis as a hero in what is a real life and death tragedy.
You have a whole generation of human lives of the hemophilia community were just wasted.
Every blood bank in the country has known for some time that some of the blood that it has been using for transfusions is contaminated.
Serving only to remind them of what might have been. Had the safety of clotting factor come before profits?
Industry knew and just saw the almighty dollar is bigger than human life.
I'm John Camp, CNN Special Assignment.